Hi students, welcome to Easy Elimu Learning Simplified. My name is Mithe, and in today's session, we're going to learn about the active voice and the passive voice. We're going to learn how to determine if a sentence is in the active voice or in the passive voice. And we are also going to learn how to convert a sentence from the active voice to the passive voice, as well as from the passive voice to the active voice. So before we proceed, we can study that sentence. The dog ate the meat. And then there are a few questions related to that sentence. What ate the meat? The dog. What did the dog do to the meat? The dog ate the meat. And lastly, what did the dog eat? The dog ate the meat. So we are going to use this sentence as our base example throughout this session. We are going to have other examples, but we will be coming back to this particular sentence. So have a look at it and also attempt to answer those questions. So when we talk about the active voice, we are talking about when we want to indicate that somebody or something has done an action. The verb that we are going to use in that sentence will be an active verb. And as we go on, you're going to see what active verb means. So in a sentence where the subject is the performer of the action stated by the verb, the sentence is said to be in active voice. So we are going to look at what is subject, what is verb, what is object. You're going to look at all of that before we now delve deep into active voice. So when we look at that sentence, the dog ate the meat. In the previous slide, I have mentioned subject, I have mentioned verb, I have mentioned object. So we are going to use this sentence to learn what is the subject, what is the verb, what is the object when it comes to a sentence. So when you look at this sentence, the dog ate the meat. The subject, when we talk about subject, we're talking about the doer of the action. Who does the action? So in that sentence, the dog ate the meat. Our subject is the dog. Our doer of the action is the dog. And then the action is the verb. The verb in this sentence is ate. So that's the action or the verb. And lastly, the object. It is the person or the thing that is affected by the action that the subject has done. So in other words, affected by the verb. So we have said the dog is our subject, ate is our verb, the meat is the object. It has been affected by the action that has been performed by the subject. So I hope that is clear and those definitions are clear. So let us now have a look at a few examples slowly by slowly and try to determine what is the subject, what is the object, what is the verb in each of these sentences. The first sentence, I cooked the food. I cooked the food. When you look at this sentence, what is the subject? Remember, we have said the subject is the doer of the action. So in this case, the action is what? Cooked. So who has done the cooking? I. So I is the subject. Cooked is the verb or the action, and then the food is the object. So for easier understanding, if you're trying to determine the subject, the verb, and the object in a sentence, it is easier when you first identify the verb or the action. People cut trees. People cut trees. In that sentence, the action is cut. So who does the cutting? People. So people is the subject. Who is affected by the cutting? Trees. So trees is the object. The police caught the thieves. The police caught the thieves. So again, we start with our action or our verb in this sentence is caught. Who did the catching? The police. So the police is the subject. Who was affected by this catching? The thieves. So the thieves is the objects. She swept the compound. She swept the compound. What is the action? Swept. That is the verb. Who did the sweeping? She. So she is the subject. Swept is the verb or the action. The compound is the object. And lastly, the hare tricked the hyena. What is the action? Tricked. Who did the tricking? The hare. So the hare is the subject. Who was affected by the tricking? The hyena. So the hyena is the object and tricking is the verb or the action. So we can now proceed to the passive voice. So remember, for active voice, we have said it's when we want to show what the subject did. We use an active verb. So the passive is now the opposite. When we want to show or when we want to state what happened to the object, we then use the passive voice. So now, when it comes to the passive voice, you will realize that we now start with the object and then the verb and then the subject. For example, again, our sentence was, the dog ate the meat. When we want to report what happened to the meat, we say, the meat was eaten by the dog. The meat was eaten by the dog. So in this sentence, what is the action? Let us start with the action. What is the action? Eaten, was eaten. What has been affected by this eating? The meat. So the meat here is the object. And then we have said the action of the verb is was eaten. You realize that now we have introduced an auxiliary verb, but we will get there. And then the dog is the subject. So when it comes to passive voice, we start with the object and then the verb and then the subject. So from that one sentence, we have seen that now the verb has a main verb, but also an auxiliary verb or a helping verb like are, is, and was. So the auxiliary verb comes before the main verb. So we are going to have a look at a few examples of sentences in the passive voice for further understanding. So using just the sentences that we had before, the food was cooked by her. Remember, this sentence was she cooked the food, but now we are saying the food was cooked by her. So the food is the object, was cooked is the verb or the action, and her, by her, is the subject. Now, when you look at the verb was cooked, you realize now we have two verbs. Was is an auxiliary verb. Cooked is the main verb. You can't say the food cooked by her. So in the passive voice, we introduce an auxiliary verb to help the main verb so that the sentence makes grammatical sense. The trees were cut by people. The trees were cut by people. So the trees is the object, were cut is the verb, wa being the auxiliary verb, and cat being the main verb. Then by people is the subject. The thieves were caught by the police. The thieves were caught by the police. So the thieves is the object, were caught the verb, were is an auxiliary verb, caught is the main verb, by the police. The police is the subject. The compound was swept by her. The compound is the object. Was swept is the action. By her is the subject. The hyena was tricked by the hare. The hyena is the object. Was tricked is the action. The hare is the subject. So it is important to note that when we are now converting a sentence to now the passive voice, from the active voice to the passive voice, there must be an auxiliary verb. Otherwise, the sentence will not make grammatical sense. So for further practice, you can have a look at these sentences. They have been converted from the active voice to the passive voice. The sentences in bold are in the active voice, and the others that are not in bold are in the passive voice. The dog chased the girl. That is active voice. So when you convert it to passive voice, it becomes the girl was chased by the dog. The students sweep the classroom every day. The classroom is swept by the students every day. Too much sugar can destroy your teeth. Your teeth can be destroyed by too much sugar. And lastly, the minister gave a speech. A speech was given by the minister. So that's it for active voice and passive voice. I hope you're now able to distinguish between a sentence that is in active voice and in passive voice, and you're also able to convert from active voice to passive voice, and also from passive voice to active voice. Thank you for tuning in, and see you in the next session.